We added another member to the family today. He was a beautiful short-haired Jack Russell. We named Sparky because he was such a little ball of energy. He was a rescue dog that came to us at the young age of 1. The pound wasn't sure of his exact age. It was more of an unofficial age we put on him. That put the number of dogs we had now at 5. 2 terriers, a Jack Russell, and 2 golden retrievers. Growing up, we always had pets. And when I finally started my own family, I wanted my kids' lives to be filled with a hectic house full of pets. My life felt complete. I was married to the most amazing wife, and we were blessed with 2 beautiful daughters, Aisha and Saursia. My wife Mered shared my love of dogs, so it was set in stone that our house would be filled with life. My favorite thing about owning dogs was when I walked indoors from work and all 5 dogs would run up to me when I arrived at the door. No matter how shitty the day was, they would instantly cheer you up. All of the dogs had different personalities, and they all loved you in their own unique way. So if there was ever a change in their moods, you would know something was up. Life isn't always a bed of roses, but for the most part, it was great. As long as everyone was happy and healthy, that's all that mattered. So, whenever it was the kid's birthday, we made a fuss over them. Our daughter Aisha was going to be 7. So, as a surprise, we decided to get her an expensive porcelain doll she had spotted in the window of an antique shop in town. The doll was a big hit with our daughter. She beamed from ear to ear when I arrived home with it. These were the kind of moments I lived for. Seeing our daughters happy filled me with immense joy. The doll had long, curly, brown hair and was dressed in a flowing silk gown that our daughter called Masha. She loved it. But as soon as we brought it into the house, the dogs began acting strange. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Sparky was new to the house, so we put it down to adjustment problems. But as soon as I walked in the door with the doll, he became extremely distressed. Every time I came in the door, it was the same thing. I would hear a stampede of dogs make their way from the kitchen to the hall. But as soon as Sparky sensed the doll, his tail folded between his legs and he ran, only to find him shaking behind the couch later. The 4 other dogs reacted differently to Sparky, but it was a reaction nonetheless. I know my dogs like I know my children, and something seemed off with them. They're all young dogs and love to jump around and play fight. But whenever our daughter walked into the room with the doll, they suddenly became submissive. They weren't scared submissive, but obedient to the point they would just sit and stare at the doll. Their eyes would fixate on the doll and follow it wherever our daughter went with it. It was strange to the point of being unsettling. Things took a turn for the stranger when I was finishing up some homework. Sparky ran into the kitchen to me, shaking and barking as if he had just been attacked. Something didn't sit right with me, so I went to the living room to see what the problem was. The kids were at school, and Aisha liked to keep the doll sitting on the couch, waiting for when she got home. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see, but when I walked into the room, Masha wasn't where she was left. Instead, she was on the living room floor, standing upright. and the 4 dogs had formed a circle around her. It almost seemed like they were worshipping her. I would love to say things settled down after that, but it only got weirder. I didn't like how the dogs followed our daughter around the house whenever she had the doll in her hands. Before the doll came into the house, they were so protective of the girls, but now they seemed to look at her with contempt. Whenever Aisha would pick up the doll, they got agitated and would growl at her. I didn't know what to make of it until I got a phone call from my wife while I was at work in hysterics. I rushed home to find my wife standing at the door with our 2 girls. Aisha was still holding the doll, and I could hear the dogs going crazy inside the house, and Aisha had a mark on her cheek. What the hell happened? I asked. I could still hear the dogs pounding against the front door of the house. The dogs are acting so strange, and Mika went for Aisha, cried my wife. I didn't know what to say. I'd never seen my wife and kids this upset before, and it felt like a dark cloud had descended over our happy home. I took the doll from my daughter and placed it by the tree before I opened the door to let the dogs out. They ran straight to the doll and formed the same circle around it, as if they were protecting it. We removed Mika from the house. It broke my heart, but we had to do it. I thought things might change after that, but things only got stranger. We took the doll from our daughter until we could figure out what was happening. We placed the doll in the shed, which made the dogs go wild. Apart from Sparky, who began watching over our daughters. I felt a bit better knowing he was in the house with them. The other dogs in the house wouldn't settle, so I had no other choice but to put them in the yard. As soon as they got out, they set up camp outside the shed, sitting obediently, as if they were waiting for the second coming. I remember thinking to myself, at least they were quiet, and it was a change from the mayhem. That changed one morning when I went outside to get in my car and was shocked to find blood everywhere. I followed a trail of blood to the shed and was horrified to find the carcass of a goat with its guts splayed out and left by the shed door. The dogs were covered in blood, but what I wasn't prepared for was the paw prints of blood arranged in a strange pattern on the shed door. If I didn't know better, I would swear it was some sort of sacrifice. This went on for days. Every time I went to get in my car, there was a different animal with its guts splayed out and left by the shed. My wife was beside herself. Life had completely changed, but the thought of something demonic happening was beyond our imagination. We were rational people, so we made excuses for what was happening. Waking up to bloody carcasses eventually stopped, but the dogs still sat outside the shed, waiting. But waiting for what? Sparky kept his distance and was happy being in the house watching over us. Apart from the other dogs, things seemed to go back to normal, which probably lulled us into a false sense of security. We didn't think much about the doll until I went to check on our daughters. Sarse was sitting alone playing with her own dolls when, suddenly, A feeling of dread crept up my spine. "Where is Aisha?" I nervously asked. My daughter looked at me with a smile on her face. "She went to the shed to get Masha so we can play families." As soon as the words left her mouth, I heard a scream out the back. My soul left my body. All I could think of were those bloody carcasses the dogs left by the shed, and feared the worst for my daughter. I made it to the back garden to find Aisha on top of the car crying her eyes out, while Sparky was furiously attacking the other dogs, trying his best to protect my daughter. Sparky was a bloody mess, but I managed to get both of them in the house. Apart from a few cuts, he was all right. That night, I locked my wife and the two girls in the bedroom until I could think of a solution. All I knew was I had to get the doll from the shed and away from the house. I waited until the next morning to get the doll as far away from the house as possible. I grabbed my old bat from the closet and took a deep breath before I opened the door. As I stepped out into the garden, the sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. Fear completely gripped my body. The 4 dogs I was expecting had now turned to hundreds. They were coming from all directions. Dogs of all kinds. The ones that arrived all sat submissively staring at the shed, as if they were waiting for the second coming. All I could think was, "I'm gonna need a bigger bat."